Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining. With me, I have Holly Holcomb, Program Director for Strategic Accounts at Itential. And this webinar is going to really build on the first two webinars that we did, where in the first one, we covered the invisible issues that kind of kill automation programs on arrival. And the second webinar, we swam in the deep end with configuration consistency, kind of like why it's hard and also why it's so important to tackle and, different options for how to tackle it. And today's webinar is all about continuing that story with building a program for diverse contributions that, maybe spans, multi-team, multi-vendor environments. So excited to be here to talk through this. How's it going, Holly?
Hey, not too bad. How about you?
Really good, really good. It's raining here, but hey, besides the rain, everything is awesome. No cooking analogies in this one, I promise.
I was waiting for it on the intro. I was like, when's the pizza coming? I am really excited to talk about contributions and building a program that can help customers scale. It is a conversation that is probably not the first one that we have with our customers when we start working with them, but later down the line when they reach a point where they need to scale and need to grow the footprint of their overarching orchestration program, this topic comes up really, really frequently. So I'm excited to dig in and to talk more and get your insight and feedback on it too, and see what we talk about.
Awesome. And you've written actually a ton, and you've spoken out a lot really about how automation, it doesn't fail, because you don't have like all the right tooling and all the right things and all the right checkboxes checked. It kind of fails from lack of participation, which is kind of where the idea came, for this webinar in particular. As it were, this is kind of like a team sport when you think about it, which I think is spot on. So just out of the gate, like why is this contribution thing such a hard problem to solve, especially at scale for larger organizations?
I think that what we see most frequently in the industry is that each team has their preferred tooling and method for producing automation based on, effectiveness in their domain, based on what they're comfortable with. And so it is really challenging to try and get all of those teams to collaborate and engage and also kind of create a holistic or cohesive orchestration strategy that can handle that diversity under the hood of the way that customers like to work and way that teams like to work. So I think that oftentimes finding a way that you can create the structure that's going to help make the organization scale and be more effective is something that customers are constantly asking about. They're trying to figure out what the magic combination and structure looks like to be more effective and to get everybody engaged in the goals of the program.
Yeah, I love that. And it's kind of funny because when I think of contributions like this, I spent a lot of time towards like the middle part of my career on the security side of the house a little bit. And this whole aspect of contributions really, I think, shares a lot of similarities with security. And, when you think about it, security teams can't just say, hey, don't hard code your secrets. That's bad. You're on the naughty list. No Santa for you this year. Usually it's on the security side of the fence to provide pre-configured like Vault integrations or hardened container images or like golden templates of some sort that follow security and compliance standards, and they have like the guardrails associated with them, and so that it's easier for the consumer to actually do the right thing, to be secure. And I think that's a lot of times in the same lens of automation, you have to provide a framework or some sort of scaffolding. It has to be structured for those companies that do want this contribution to happen. And, you need contribution guidelines, you need Git flow standardization, moderators that approve pull requests. And, even some companies might accept contributions outside of their company, like in the landscape of like open source as such. And I've heard many times like, oh, these cyber teams, they just throw it over the wall and make it hard. They make our lives miserable. Everything's hard, hard, hard. And I think a lot of times this happens in automation as well. At the end of the day, there is a balance to be found. It lives sort of at that intersection of user experience, scale, and security, which I think, is something that is an industry. And, when we talk about these technologies, we just have to consider.
Yeah, I love that. What I hear you saying is, one, we have to know what is expected in order for a contribution to be accepted. So specifically, if I have something that I want to be a part of the orchestration program, that I want to get promoted to production so that we can all start seeing the benefits of it, I have to know how to do it. I have to know what the criteria are, what needs to be submitted with my contribution. Is there documentation that's required? Should it pass any kind of test? Who's responsible for that testing? All of that needs to be clearly outlined somewhere so that I kind of understand what the goal looks like from a contribution perspective. I think we've seen that with a lot of our customers, that oftentimes there is an expectation that other teams contribute, but maybe the process isn't super clear on how to contribute and what they expect them to contribute. In addition to the automation asset itself, what else is needed? So I think another thing that I really appreciate about what you said about the cyber team analogy is that in addition to telling them what the framework and what expectations you have around the contribution from like a functional or technical requirement perspective, there's also the notion that if there are certain expectations that you want baked into your framework, make those easily accessible, make examples of those, make it something that they can just plug their contribution into to make sure that they're adopting the best practice that you see out within the organization and their standards and security standards. So I love that.
Yeah, you just mentioned a few good points there, but it's almost like having, like I bought this gigantic metal crazy swing set for my kids a few years ago. And I went and I opened up this box and the instruction manual looks like it was back from like the 80s. Like it was so hard to follow. There was a lot of things that were incorrect with it. I did. And then I tried doing it without the instruction manual. This thing had like 1,000 pieces. And what did I do? I went online and I found a newer, better, modern instruction manual that, somebody outside of this company had put together to build this thing. And I ended up using that one because it was clear. All the nonsense and all the things that I didn't need were not present. Like it had what I needed, and then it had examples, and then it had a link. It had a QR code to a YouTube video to this person's YouTube channel, and it was phenomenal. Saved me a ton of time, and I was a happy camper. It made it easy for me to put this thing together and not break it in the process for just lack of, whatever, anger and everything else.
Well, the next topic that we usually hear from our customers when it comes to a contribution strategy is all around right tool, right job. When should I be using Python? When should I be using Ansible? When should I use OpenTofu? What makes the most sense? When should I use iTential? What makes the most sense? And how do I know what a best practice looks like around using the right tool for the right job? William, you've been in this game for a really long time. What are your thoughts?
Oh, such a good question. Such a hot and heated question a lot of times. And also kind of a funny question. So, again, kind of going off, hopefully not on a rant here, but if you think about when you're doing anything new, anybody in the world that's either building something new or they're getting into a new space and technology and they see this 1,000 tools, the logical thing to do, like in your brain, you're thinking like, okay, I want to not waste a bunch of my time, is A better than B? Or how does A and B compare to using C and D, etc.? But this creates challenges. So the more that you learn about these things, of course, the more wisdom that you get over time. And the funny thing about all this is, like, I hear it so much is like, why is this Open Tofu or Terraform thing better than this Ansible thing? And why is Ansible better than this Python thing and what have you? And like, let me ask you this. Why is a Phillips head screwdriver better than a flathead? Or I just recently did drywall, but why is a 1 1.25, I think is the default size for drywall screw. So why is that 1.25 drywall screw better than a 4-inch wood screw? Like that is like, now in 2025, when someone says is Ansible better than Open Tofu, I hear, why is a Phillips head screwdriver better than a flathead? And someone in another trade, like in construction, say they presented on this at a conference, they'd be laughed all the way out to the parking lot. And I recently had a conversation with Yvonne Pepelniak on the podcast I host, and he made this incredible analogy with furniture building. And, basically, why would a contractor get caught up on this tool versus that tool? The customer wants the wardrobe to hang their clothes in. Do you think they care? And that's where using the right tool for the right job comes in. And, you don't want to go out and purchase every tool under the sun. But these tools live in very different parts of your tech stack. A lot of times, and it also depends on your operational processes and how you procure artifacts. So say that you're building in cloud. You're building, you have these hardened images, like say you're using HashiCorp's Packer, and you're building these images, but you're doing it at build time. So you're not deploying the VM and then configuring it. You're actually in your build pipeline. You're, procuring this image, and then you're configuring it with something like Ansible for your configuration management. And then when you have that artifact and it's completely intact, okay, then you're using something, your stateful tool like OpenTofu or Terraform, to deploy that infrastructure intact into the wild. So a lot of it too is, depending on what you're doing, you have to decide, okay, hey, what's happening at build time? What's happening at runtime? You really have to think through the whole thing to really inform, hey, is this tool better for this part of my tech stack for this process? Not start with, hey, is this tool better than that tool? Okay, how am I going to hammer that into this process I've already built?
And how do I force everybody to use that same tool?
Okay, we're going to use Terraform for everything.
All things.
We'll see what happens. That's going to be fun. What about you, Holly? I mean, you've talked to a lot of big companies that are going through a lot of these challenges, that are still trying to figure out, basically the way that makes sense for them to do it. But have you noticed any patterns?
I think that the patterns that we've noticed is that the trend is that customers need a solution that's going to give them the flexibility to be able to accept different types of contributions based on different tooling and based on what the teams know how to do best and how they think they can be more effective at creating automation for their job and their very specific goals. So from what we've seen, I think there's a ton of debate out there on which tooling is the best for specific areas of the business. And our goal is always to say that's, if that's what makes the most sense for this domain and with this team, how can we build a framework around that that's going to enable you to bring those assets and contributions into the fold of orchestration and get more value out of them?
I love that. And I mean, one of the things I love about sort of the way Itential, the way we do orchestration and some of the value we provide is, you can have, the bigger the company and the longer they've been around, they usually have a lot of stuff laying around. They have a lot of tools, that maybe power some older environments. So they may have outdated tooling that's just kind of sitting there and managing some infrastructure for the time being, but they also have greenfield environments going in. They have new stuff. So when you look at the whole picture of, hey, I've got this old stuff, we can't just flip a light switch and get rid of it. It's got to remain out there because this is important. But we also have this bleeding edge stuff where, we're doing AI things or something, AI infrastructure, and we're modernizing in these areas of the business. Well, we can basically take whatever tools that you have and we can orchestrate them. We can put together that whole picture, at least so you have visibility and you have that control to apply some level of automation, process automation across all these distinct components, whether it's brownfield, or greenfield.
Absolutely. It's all about getting the biggest bang for your buck. If you've got assets that exist that do a very disparate activity, that if plugged into an overarching orchestration that helps you accomplish the rest of the business process, the idea of throwing away these things that are functional and useful today just so that you can iterate on it and build something that does almost identical functionality but requires you to build it over the course of a week or something like that, I think that we're missing the mark.
I love that. That's excellent. 100%.
Well, William, I'm going to switch gears for a moment and I'm going to use the G word. Anytime we have conversations with our customers around governance, there's always that one person in the room that is like, oh God, you can see the exasperation on their face about not wanting to have this discussion. Usually when people talk about governance, the first thing that comes to mind is something that's static or outdated or is overbearing and impeding progress. And when we look at best practices and what we see in functional and high-performing orchestration programs, it is anything but static. It's anything but overbearing. It's really fine-tuned to make sure that the program itself is as effective as possible. So I would love to hear your feedback on governance and when you think that governance is meeting the mark and when it's failing.
So when I was on the enterprise side of the house, I had this trick that I would use where a lot of times I would have something given to me by usually someone in security, and they'd say, hey, you got to do this. And sometimes they were things that were perfectly spot on, but sometimes you'd have things come in and, they just made like no sense. And I would present a question back to them. I'd say, okay, where is this in writing? Can you show it to me? And they're like, no, it's just a security policy. I'm like, well, if it's a policy, it's in writing. Let's see it. Because I don't think that this is right and we want to do what's best for the business. We need to revisit it and we need to look at it so we can understand it. This actually happened quite a few times. And, that's one thing is if you have to sit there and ask, where is this thing in writing or where do I go? Like, where is it documented? What does it mean? Like, if you find yourself asking these questions, as it relates to governance, then something's wrong and it's time to try to fix it. It's hard because big companies, they're big and they have a lot of stuff. They've been around for a while and you have all these policies and all this, a lot of old stuff that like never gets revisited and never gets thrown out. So then you have new things on top of it and then you just have a ton of stuff. And hey, the more things you have, it's like me with my kids, like they all talk to me at like the same time and it goes in one ear and out the other. I don't know what's going on. It's really hard. So you have all these processes and eventually you get confused. And what that leads to is really, big opportunities for security in an organization to fail. So another way, okay, don't go on a rant, but if you look at like how some of these big tech companies have evolved, not only do customer needs change, but the technology landscape changes. So if you look at AWS, they didn't start with the complex enterprise features we see today. So back in 2006, I think, AWS launched and they just had 3 services, Holly. They had 3 simple services. They had like S3, SQS, and EC2. And very basic, very simple. But as enterprise customers started adopting cloud, AWS had to evolve their governance model and their service offerings. So And in the Wayback Machine in the early days, AWS's approach was essentially, hey, here's some virtual machines, here's some storage buckets, figure that out. And, that worked for like startups and, tech savvy companies. But when large enterprises with like very complex brownfield tech, compliance requirements, multi-account structures, very sophisticated and complex networking, all this stuff started to happen. AWS really had to rethink their platform, and they introduced things like VPCs for network isolation and transit gateways for, these complex networking requirements. And the list goes on. They had to pivot. And the key insight is that AWS didn't try to predict every enterprise requirement up front. They listened to their customers and the pain points and evolved accordingly with those requirements, with the change in pace of technology. And that kind of reinforces to the furniture assembly analogy as well. Like, AWS's architects, the early architects, they were brilliant, but they hadn't assembled that furniture yet of running enterprise workloads at scale until their customers actually started doing it. So I don't know if that completely answers the question, but that's kind of my view on it. And one final observation, and then my rant will be complete, is a lot of times the cooks in the governance kitchen in these big companies are very far removed from the boots on the ground. They aren't in the weeds of, just kind of like understanding the actual technology. They're in the paper references, in the best practices. They're not in the nuances of deploying the complicated infrastructure. So again, to the furniture, it's oftentimes the folks that have like never assembled the furniture that are putting together the blueprint or the plans for people to follow that are actually doing the building. And this might work in some cases, but a lot of times it just doesn't work well. The results are going to be very mixed.
I was waiting for food to make its formal entry into this webinar, and I'm happy that it's here. I couldn't agree more with what you just said. The piece that really sticks out to me is the notion that as technology evolves, governance has to evolve with it. And there is no such thing as a one-size-fits-all. Trying to apply the degree of governance that you would apply to a team that maybe is building with one tool suite versus another team with a different tool suite, there has to be some degree of understanding the nuance and difference between the two and building governance that really is focused on, again, what is the outcome? What is the output that we're trying to target? And how do we make sure that, we do our best to provide guardrails and examples of best practice without creating a really overbearing or burdensome set of guardrails that are going to slow everybody down and may not be effective towards the actual outcome, to your security example earlier.
I love that. And that ties to a lot of the good tidbits we talked about with config consistency too, where like getting this part right and getting your hands around it is like one of the key contributors to having a good organizational health around configuration consistency, like multi-domain. So yeah, excellent points. So another thing that you've mentioned a bit and you've talked about, Holly, is that, contribution isn't just about writing some code. I mean, if it was always just a technology problem and it was just lines in code, we wouldn't have any problems, because technology is rarely the problem factor in a lot of these scenarios. It's about repeatable value, which is something you've harped on a lot, which I love. And another thing too is like a lot of times, even though every organization's different, they have different challenges and so forth, it's good to have like maybe a North Star of what success actually looks like. Like, what are some of the different forms that contribution can take in a well-designed framework? So what do you think about that?
Yeah. I think what I've seen personally with customers is that at the orchestration layer, There's the standardized units around things like updating tickets or updating sources of truth. And like we talked about previously, there are those reusable assets that help you do that activity in the best practice way around like, vault integration and things like that. And then at the automation layer, to the conversation we just wrapped up a little while ago around right tool for the right job, it's finding out what is most effective from a contribution perspective, talking to the teams, understanding what their tooling of choice is, whether it's Python, whether it's any of the tools that we've covered so far. And then also, we can't ignore the fact that skills play a really big part in defining what makes the most sense for a contribution at the automation layer. In some situations, it's going to be working with the API for a controller, understanding what the controller is going to do as a part of the automation. In other situations, the team might really prefer to lean into Python. They might really prefer to use OpenTofu to accomplish their goals. So I think from what we've seen, the teams that have the right skill set, that want to use their very specific automation to do, like just to throw an example out there, for teams that are trying to manage their like VM infrastructure, for example, or they're trying to push config, maybe they think Ansible is the right tool for them. They've got the skill set. They know it's effective at what it does. There's another team that's actively working on standing up infrastructure, you mentioned, like with OpenTofu or Terraform. That is the right tool for that team. And contributing at that level, the things that they've already built, the things that are functioning and offering value to the organization today, finding a way to seamlessly put those into an orchestration framework so that it has all of the audit and tracking and also RBAC on top of it to make sure that it's executed in a way that aligns with the security standards, with the organizational standards. I think those are kind of the attributes of success that I've seen for organizations that have really tried to take the best of what exists today, both from an asset perspective, from a skill set, from a team perspective, and find ways to pull them into their digital transformation that is going to involve engagement and adoption from all parts of the organization. It can't be a single team making this happen. It has to happen across the organization. And if you can find a way to pull those teams in and show them what contribution looks like in an effective way, you reap the benefits of pulling all of the value that they've got in those existing assets, but then putting some guardrails around it so that everybody can benefit from it, not just a single person or a single team.
I love that. That was almost poetic. Just off the top of my head, one thing I would add too is like companies and then leadership and then teams and directors down to managers and then to the boots on the ground, they get kind of stuck in is a lot of times they try to go too fast and they try to actually execute work when, the car's kind of still getting put together. And then you end up with something that's out of compliance that you have to go and remediate. And one of those things that, I know it's really hard to do, you're a big company and you have funding for a program and you have 8 months left in the year and you got to get it done. But going and rushing before a lot of these details are even thought through or considered, it is really going to hurt you in the long haul. So I'm not saying like go really slow, but, taper that Wild West, put those spurs away and take it a little bit slower and just think through, hey, I want this to be bigger than myself. I want it to be bigger than my team. I want it to be bigger than our department. Like this impacts all of us. So let's get it right. So one thing, as we're kind of getting to the point where we're going to wrap up, but one thing that just sticks out in my mind, and I know this is like a really hard question, but I have to ask, you've probably seen many things done like very well and maybe some that struggled a little bit, but what do the most successful like automation leaders out there that you've worked with, do differently to sort of scale this idea of participation? Like, I can imagine culture's got a ton to do with it, but what about processes, the technology? Just what are some of those lessons learned or observations there?
Ooh, yeah. I think about all of the different things that we've seen implemented in different customers. There are aspects that are culture, like you mentioned. There's aspects of that building a culture around collaboration is not something, I think it's something that we take for granted a lot of times. Teams are very siloed. Success criteria and metrics are oftentimes siloed as well. So I think that oftentimes it really does take a transformational leader that is going to try and wrap metrics around the team at large. So it being really specific and direct about what success looks like within the organization, and that should encompass some degree of collaboration. In terms of an actual framework and process and program structure, again, there has to be communication that is seamless and is constantly happening, and iterations on the framework that are constantly happening to say, this was really effective when we had technology that did X, Y, and Z. But now with the current tooling that we have in place, with the technology that we have in place today, we need to make sure that all of the governance that is in place around contributions and engagement with all of the different teams and the technologies that they're leveraging today, that everything is still up to date, that it's still effective. It's that constant review and evaluation of the framework that says, this was here for a reason. The reason was because there was a problem 20 years ago around this type of issue. Is that still relevant for us today? So I think part of it is culture, and building a culture around collaboration and encouraging more teams to work together. I think part of it is program process. Some of it, and this is probably going to be like not a super popular opinion, but some of it is being specific about what your expectations are and having those published in a way that is self-service, so that you're not having a conversation to understand what do I have to do to make sure that my asset gets to production. Like, I don't, maybe I don't want to talk to William every time I have something that needs to go into production. Like, maybe it should just be something that I can go and read some guidelines and say, okay, this thing is really important to the organization. I need for it to get to production. Let me go check the guidelines and understand what's going to be required for me to get it there. I think all of those factors, come together to create really effective programs as a whole. And, a lot of it is a mixture of all of them, and also cultural based on the organization.
I love that. You said a few really important things in there. And I think one of the things was, knowing what success looks like and having that clearly defined. But then how do you know if something was even successful? You have to understand how to measure it. Mm-hmm. And you can't build a bunch of stuff and then look back and say, oh, was that successful or was it not? Oh, let's throw some KPIs on there and call it a day.
Yeah.
You want to think about those things, up front as you begin building. Mm-hmm. I think that's just super great points. Great points.
All right, William, I know that we're wrapping up and had a lot of really great conversation about play sets and, of course, food, as always. I guess in terms of closing things out, if you and your organization are interested in looking for a platform that is going to offer the type of flexibility and a diversity of contribution type like we've talked about today, we definitely encourage you to take a look at iTential. And we'd also love your thoughts on what are the right tools for the right job for your organization, or what's worked best for you in terms of governance. Feel free to let us know on LinkedIn, and otherwise we will see you next time.